There are aircraft in civilian aviation that make even the most fearless pilots turn around and walk away. We're talking about men and women who've flown combat missions under enemy fire, who've landed damaged fighters on pitching carrier decks, who've ejected from disintegrating aircraft at supersonic speeds and climbed right back into the cockpit the next day. People whose entire careers have been built on controlling machines at the absolute edge of physics. And yet, when you show them certain civilian aircraft and offer them the keys, they look you dead in the eye and say absolutely not. That should terrify you. What you're about to discover are 5 certified aircraft that were manufactured, sold to the public, and are still flying right now. Planes that look perfectly normal, that passed FAA certification, that have glossy marketing materials promising performance and capability. But beneath those ordinary exteriors lurk characteristics so fundamentally dangerous, so unforgiving of the smallest error, that pilots with thousands of hours of military flying experience refuse to touch the controls. Think about what that means. These combat pilots have recovered from spins in fighters, managed hydraulic failures at 500 knots, brought aircraft home with battle damage that should have made flight impossible. And these 5 civilian planes scare them. The reason is as disturbing as it is simple. These aircraft punish normal mistakes with death, not recklessness or incompetence, but the small errors every pilot makes occasionally. A moment of distraction, slightly misjudging approach speed, failing to notice a warning sign that developed gradually. In most aircraft, these mistakes are correctable. But in these 5 aircraft, that same small mistake creates a cascade beyond control, faster than human reaction time allows. By the time your brain recognizes something is wrong, physics has already determined the outcome, and what follows is just watching the ground rush up while your hands work, controls that no longer respond. The accident reports will haunt you. Experienced pilots with spotless safety records spanning decades dying in crashes where investigators found the pilot did everything correctly according to standard procedures. Everything they were taught, everything that should have worked, executed perfectly, and it didn't matter. We're talking about stall characteristics, where the aircraft stops responding to controls entirely and descends vertically, while the pilot fights desperately. Structural vulnerabilities that seem fine for years until something fails catastrophically without warning. Engine configurations that seem adequate until you lose power at exactly the wrong moment and discover single-engine performance was a wildly optimistic fantasy. Control systems that work perfectly 99% of the time, but have failure modes so catastrophic that when they occur, you measure your remaining life in seconds. Insurance companies know the truth. Underwriters refuse to cover certain aircraft at any price. Flight schools quietly refuse to purchase specific models, knowing their accident rates would destroy the business. Maintenance facilities that have examined failures firsthand warn pilots away, sharing knowledge that never makes it into official channels. When people whose livelihoods depend on aviation tell you certain planes are too dangerous, you should listen. Some of these aircraft seduce pilots with spectacular capabilities, speed rivaling aircraft costing 5 times as much. Performance that turns heads. The temptation is obvious, and countless pilots have convinced themselves that warnings are exaggerated, that their skills are sufficient, that accidents happen to other people who must have done something wrong. Then they become statistics. Other aircraft on this list look harmless, trainers and light planes that seem perfect for recreational flying. They have reputations as docile and forgiving. That confidence is what kills, because these planes hide vicious characteristics that only appear when conditions align perfectly, and by then, it's far too late. What you're about to learn could save your life. Every aircraft we're discussing is still flying, available on the used market at surprisingly low prices that should be your first warning, available for rent at some flight schools, owned by enthusiasts who will tell you how much they love them while ignoring the accidents. If you don't know what to look for, if you don't understand why combat pilots who fear nothing avoid these aircraft, you could become the next preventable tragedy. So pay attention, because the next 15 minutes might be the most important aviation safety information you ever receive. We're about to expose the aircraft the industry doesn't want to talk about. The planes that look normal but carry death in their design. The machines that even the bravest, most skilled pilots fear. A-5, Piper Aerostar, the twin-engine speed demon that kills its pilots. The Piper Aerostar looks like pure aviation ambition materialized in aluminum and composite. With its sleek profile, counter-rotating propellers, and promised speeds exceeding 260 knots, it was marketed as the ultimate high-performance twin for the serious pilot who demanded both speed and twin-engine safety. Built between 1967 and 1984, with production spanning several ownership changes, including Ted Smith Aerostar and eventually Piper Aircraft, approximately 1,000 units were manufactured in models ranging from the Aerostar 600 through the turbocharged 700 series. The aircraft features a mid-wing design, unusual for light twins, wingspan of 36.8 feet, length of 34.8 feet, and a maximum takeoff weight ranging from 5,500 to 6,315 pounds, depending on model. Power comes from two Lycoming engines, typically IO 540 or TIO 540 variants, producing between 290 and 350 horsepower each, driving counter-rotating three-blade propellers that eliminate critical engine considerations during single-engine operations. The cruise speed of 240 to 260 knots made it one of the fastest piston twins ever produced, and the pressurized 700p model could reach altitudes of 25,000 feet, offering jet-like performance at a fraction of the cost. But beneath that impressive performance envelope lurks a killer. The Aerostar's accident rate is substantially higher than comparable twins, and the nature of those accidents reveals systematic problems that experienced pilots recognize immediately. The aircraft's speed comes from aggressive aerodynamic design featuring relatively small wings for its weight, creating high wing loading of approximately 45 pounds per square foot compared to 30 to 35 for typical twins. High wing loading means higher stall speeds, less margin for error, and less forgiving flight characteristics. The Aerostar's stall speed with gear and flaps down is approximately 80 knots. Extraordinarily high for a light twin, meaning approaches must be flown fast, with little room for slowing down if you misjudge the landing. More critically, the aircraft's behavior during single-engine operations is where pilots die. Despite the counter-rotating props eliminating critical engine issues, the Aerostar's single-engine service ceiling is marginal, often below 10,000 feet, and single-engine climb rate is anemic at 200 to 300 feet per minute under ideal conditions. At high-density altitudes, mountainous terrain, or with full fuel and passengers, single-engine climb becomes zero or negative, meaning an engine failure after takeoff at the wrong moment is unsurvivable. Accident reports paint a consistent picture. Pilot loses an engine shortly after takeoff, attempts to return to the airport or find a suitable landing area, but the aircraft simply won't maintain altitude. The pilot follows training, identifies the dead engine, feathers the prop, banks no more than 5 degrees toward the operating engine, and maintains blue line speed of 115 knots. Everything is done correctly. But the aircraft descends anyway, performance degraded by the draggy dead engine and insufficient power from the remaining engine to both maintain altitude and airspeed. The pilot faces an impossible choice: maintain airspeed and accept controlled flight into terrain, or try to stretch the glide and risk falling below minimum controllable airspeed, at which point the aircraft will snap roll and enter an unrecoverable spin. Many Aerostar accidents involve exactly this scenario, with wreckage showing the pilot fought until impact, engine controls properly configured, but physics simply didn't allow survival. The Aerostar also suffers from maintenance-intensive systems that degrade performance and safety if not addressed immediately. The turbocharged engines require precise management. An overboost or improper cooling can destroy cylinders rapidly. The pressurization system in 700p models adds complexity and failure points, with seal degradation reducing cabin pressure and engine performance at altitude. Landing gear retraction systems are notoriously problematic, with hydraulic failures stranding pilots with gear up or partially extended, forcing gear-up landings on aircraft worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The fuel system requires careful management across multiple tanks, and fuel mismanagement has caused engine failures when pilots inadvertently run a tank dry while another still contains fuel. Most damning is the aircraft's reputation among insurance underwriters. Many insurance companies refuse to cover Aerostar operations entirely, considering the risk unacceptable regardless of pilot qualifications. Those that do provide coverage charge premiums 2 to 3 times higher than comparable twins and require pilots to have not just multi-engine ratings but hundreds of hours of multi-engine time plus specific Aerostar training and recurrent check rides. Flight schools almost universally refuse to use Aerostars for multi-engine training despite their performance, recognizing that the aircraft punishes student errors fatally. Experienced pilots who've transitioned into Aerostars describe the experience as requiring constant vigilance, meticulous systems management, and acceptance that any engine failure at the wrong phase of flight means you're probably going to crash. Some pilots love the Aerostar's speed and capability, but they acknowledge living with risks that other aircraft simply don't present. Combat pilots, accustomed to risk, look at the Aerostar's single-engine performance and accident history and conclude the juice isn't worth the squeeze. 4. Mooney M20J201, the efficiency machine that doesn't forgive. The Mooney M20J201 represents peak efficiency in single-engine piston aircraft design, achieving cruise speeds of 160 to 175 knots on just 180 horsepower while sipping fuel at 10 gallons per hour. Manufactured from 1977 through 1998, with approximately 2,000 units produced, the M20J features Mooney's signature design elements including a steel tube fuselage with aluminum skin, distinctive forward-swept vertical stabilizer, manually operated landing gear that retracts backward into the wings, and incredibly tight cowling around the Lycoming IO360 engine. With a wingspan of 36.1 feet, length of 24.8 feet, and maximum takeoff weight of 2,740 pounds, the M20J achieves its impressive efficiency through aerodynamic cleanliness and aggressive speed-optimized design. The cowling is so tight around the engine that cooling is marginal, requiring precise airspeed management during climbs to prevent cylinder overheating. The wings are relatively small with high aspect ratio, creating low drag but also high stall speeds and unforgiving slow flight characteristics. What makes the M20J dangerous isn't any single catastrophic flaw, but rather an accumulation of characteristics that punish sloppy flying with consequences far more severe than most trainers or general aviation aircraft. The landing gear system is entirely manual, requiring pilots to physically pump a handle approximately 30 times to extend or retract the gear. A system that saves weight and eliminates hydraulic complexity, but introduces significant pilot workload during critical phases of flight. More problematically, the gear has no emergency extension system beyond the manual pump, meaning a mechanical failure in the linkage can leave pilots unable to extend gear at all. Gear-up landings are disturbingly common in Moonies, some due to pilot distraction or forgetting to extend gear, but others due to mechanical failures that gave pilots no option. The gear warning horn is notoriously quiet and easily missed, and the visual gear position indicators are small and poorly positioned, contributing to continued gear-up accidents decade after decade. The M20J's speed comes with handling characteristics that novice pilots find shocking. Stall speed with flaps is approximately 60 knots, but approach speeds are typically 75 to 80 knots, leaving minimal margin for error. The wing's high loading means the aircraft wants to fly fast, and slowing it down requires aggressive power reduction and precise pitch control. Pilots transitioning from slower trainers consistently fly approaches too fast, floating halfway down the runway before touching down with insufficient runway remaining to stop. The aircraft's efficiency means it glides extremely well, making go-arounds challenging because even with full power applied, the aircraft may not climb adequately if airspeed has deteriorated. In the pattern, the M20J demands precise energy management. Carrying too much speed leads to long landings or runway overruns, while getting too slow risks accelerated stalls during the turn from base to final, a scenario that has killed numerous pilots over the decades. Stall characteristics are particularly unforgiving. The M20J's high aspect ratio wing stalls progressively from root to tip, which sounds benign, but in practice means one wing can stall before the other during uncoordinated flight, producing rapid roll that novice pilots instinctively attempt to counter with aileron input, exactly the wrong response that accelerates the developing spin. Mooney spin characteristics are aggressive, with recovery requiring immediate recognition, power to idle, opposite rudder, and forward yoke. But delay of even a few seconds can allow the spin to develop beyond recoverability, particularly at low altitude where most pattern stalls occur. Accident data shows consistent patterns of pilots stalling M20Js during go-arounds, short field approaches, or steep turns, with the resulting spin entering so rapidly that impact occurs before pilots complete even the first step of recovery procedures. The engine cooling issue kills engines and sometimes pilots. The tight cowling requires pilots to maintain cruise climb speeds of at least 100 knots, even though the aircraft can climb at 80 knots, because slower speeds reduce cooling airflow, causing cylinder head temperatures to spike toward redline. Pilots climbing aggressively in hot weather or at high-density altitude frequently cook cylinders, leading to premature engine failures, stuck valves, or catastrophic failures when weakened cylinder heads crack. The Lycoming IO360 is generally reliable, but when installed in M20J cowlings and operated by pilots who don't obsessively monitor temperatures, longevity suffers dramatically. Engine failures in M20Js are complicated by the aircraft's gliding characteristics. The clean airframe means glide ratio is excellent at proper speed, approximately 10:1. But if the pilot fixates on reaching an airport and allows speed to decay, glide ratio deteriorates rapidly and the aircraft descends much faster than pilots expect. Insurance and training again tell the story. The M20J requires transition training even for experienced pilots, with insurers mandating 10 to 25 hours of dual instruction before allowing solo flight. Flight schools that operate M20Js as trainers lose them regularly to gear-up landings, runway excursions, and pattern stall accidents, leading many to conclude the aircraft is unsuitable for primary training despite its excellent cross-country capabilities. Experienced pilots who fly M20Js successfully treat them with respect, bordering on fear, maintaining meticulous speed control, never getting slow in the pattern, and accepting that the aircraft demands precision on every approach. Combat pilots comfortable with high-performance military aircraft find the M20J's demands reasonable, but many still choose not to fly them recreationally, recognizing that civilian general aviation doesn't require the constant edge of performance flying that makes the M20J dangerous in routine operations. And 3. Beechcraft skipper, the trainer that kills students. The Beechcraft skipper seems like the last aircraft that should appear on a list of dangerous planes. It's a two-seat trainer, designed and marketed specifically for flight schools teaching primary students, manufactured by legendary Beechcraft between 1979 and 1981, with 312 units produced. The skipper features a distinctive V-tail similar to Beechcraft's Bonanza, but scaled down, conventional tricycle landing gear, and a modest Lycoming O235 engine producing just 115 horsepower. With a wingspan of 30 feet, length of 24 feet, and maximum gross weight of 1,675 pounds, the skipper was designed to compete directly with Cessna 152 and Piper Tomahawk in the primary trainer market. Cruise speed is 110 knots, stall speed with flaps is 49 knots, and handling is generally docile and predictable. So why do experienced pilots avoid it? The answer lies in the skipper's deep stall characteristics, a phenomenon where the horizontal stabilizer becomes blanketed by disturbed airflow from the stalled wing, rendering the elevator ineffective and preventing recovery. The skipper's T-tail configuration places the horizontal stabilizer atop the vertical fin, high above the wing, which works well in normal flight but creates vulnerability during stalls. When the wing stalls, particularly in an uncoordinated stall where one wing drops, the turbulent wake from the stalled wing flows directly over the tail and the elevator loses authority. Pilots attempting recovery by pushing forward on the yoke discover the nose won't drop, the aircraft remains stalled, and altitude continues bleeding away. In a deep stall, the aircraft descends almost vertically, belly toward the ground, at rates exceeding 2,000 feet per minute, impact occurring before pilots realize recovery is impossible. The skipper's deep stall tendency was identified during certification testing, but the FAA determined that normal category aircraft, like the skipper, didn't require full stall testing in all configurations, and the manufacturer elected not to thoroughly test accelerated stalls, cross-controlled stalls, or stalls during climbing or descending turns. After several fatal accidents involving flight students, the aviation community began recognizing patterns. Students practicing stalls, particularly power-on stalls or departure stalls, simulating engine failure after takeoff, would inadvertently allow the aircraft to enter uncoordinated flight, one wing dropping before the other. The dropped wing would stall first, and the aircraft would begin rolling, exactly the scenario instructors teach students to expect and correct with rudder input. But in the skipper, that roll could transition into a deep stall before the student recognized what was happening, the nose high, controls ineffective, and impact inevitable. Several accidents involved experienced flight instructors who couldn't recover from deep stalls entered during training maneuvers. In one notable accident, an instructor with over 10,000 hours and an ATP rating was demonstrating stalls to a student when the skipper entered a deep stall at approximately 3,500 feet AGL. The instructor immediately recognized the situation, applied full power, pushed the yoke forward, and attempted to rock the wings to disrupt the stall. Standard recovery techniques. None worked. The aircraft descended nearly vertically for over 30 seconds before impacting terrain, killing both occupants. The wreckage analysis showed the instructor had done everything correctly, but the aircraft simply wouldn't recover once deep stalled. Beechcraft eventually issued service bulletins, modifying the elevator to increase effectiveness and providing revised stall training procedures, warning pilots to avoid uncoordinated stalls and to recover immediately at the first indication of stall rather than fully developing the stall. But the modifications couldn't fully eliminate the vulnerability, and the skipper's reputation was permanently damaged. Flight schools that had purchased skippers found themselves unable to sell them, with many eventually scrapping airworthy aircraft because no one would buy them regardless of price. Insurance for skippers became expensive and difficult to obtain, with underwriters recognizing the aircraft's history and demanding high premiums or limiting coverage to exclude stall training entirely, which defeats the entire purpose of a primary trainer. The final nail in the skipper's coffin came from the U.S. Air Force Academy, which operated skippers for cadet flight training. After a fatal accident where a cadet and instructor died in a deep stall, the Academy grounded its entire skipper fleet, conducted extensive testing, and concluded the aircraft was unsuitable for primary training where stalls are frequently practiced. They replaced all skippers with Cessna 172s and Cirrus SR-20s, aircraft with benign stall characteristics that give pilots time to recognize and correct mistakes. For an aircraft specifically designed as a primary trainer to be rejected by one of the most prestigious flight training programs in the world speaks volumes about its fundamental unsuitability for the mission. Today, skippers are relatively rare, many grounded permanently or used only for VFR transportation by pilots who avoid practicing stalls. Instructors who learn to fly in skippers describe them as generally pleasant aircraft, ruined by one critical flaw that can kill without warning. The lesson is sobering. Even aircraft that seem docile and safe can harbor death traps that only reveal themselves in specific circumstances. And when those circumstances are precisely the training maneuvers that student pilots must practice repeatedly, the aircraft becomes unsuitable regardless of its other qualities. Combat pilots who've spun fighters and recovered from situations that would kill most civilian pilots still refuse to practice stalls in skippers, recognizing that some scenarios offer no recovery regardless of skill. 2. Piper Cub, the beloved classic that's killed thousands. The Piper J-3 Cub is arguably the most iconic aircraft in American aviation history. The plane that taught a generation to fly served in World War II as a liaison and observation aircraft and established general aviation as accessible to ordinary people. Manufactured from 1938 through 1947 with approximately 20,000 units produced, the Cub features a simple steel tube fuselage with fabric covering, high wing configuration, tandem seating with the student in front and instructor behind, and a modest Continental A65 engine producing just 65 horsepower, with a wingspan of 35.3 feet, length of 22.4 feet, and gross weight of 1,120 pounds, the Cub cruises at 75 mph, stalls at 38 mph, and can operate from incredibly short, rough fields that would destroy modern aircraft. It's slow, simple, and forgiving, with handling characteristics that allow even novice pilots to fly competently after minimal instruction. So why is it on this list? Because the Piper Cub has killed more pilots than almost any other aircraft type in history. The total number of Cub accidents runs into thousands, with fatalities in the hundreds. Yes, the sheer number of Cubs produced and hours flown contributes to the statistics, but even accounting for exposure, the Cub's accident rate is sobering. The reasons are multifaceted, starting with the aircraft's anemic power. 65 horsepower is barely sufficient for a 200-pound aircraft, giving the Cub a climb rate of approximately 450 feet per minute at sea level with one person aboard. Add a passenger, full fuel and baggage, and climb rate can drop to 200 feet per minute or less. At high-density altitude, mountainous terrain, or hot weather, the Cub simply cannot climb. Performance becomes zero or negative, and pilots find themselves unable to outclimb terrain or obstacles. Countless Cub accidents involve pilots attempting takeoffs from high-altitude fields, mountain strips, or on hot days, discovering too late that the aircraft won't climb, and impacting trees, power lines, or terrain shortly after liftoff with no altitude or energy to maneuver. The Cub's fuel system is gravity-fed from a single tank in the fuselage ahead of the instrument panel, holding just 12 gallons, providing approximately 2.5 hours of endurance at cruise. The fuel gauge is notoriously unreliable, often sticking or providing inaccurate readings, leading pilots to run out of fuel unexpectedly. Fuel exhaustion is one of the leading causes of Cub accidents, with pilots either misjudging endurance, trusting faulty gauges, or simply losing track of time during low-altitude sightseeing flights. When the engine quits, the Cub's glide ratio of approximately 8.1 doesn't provide much time or distance to find a landing spot, and forced landings in Cubs frequently result in substantial damage or injury when pilots attempt to stretch the glide to reach a field and stall instead, or when the chosen landing area proves unsuitable with obstacles, ditches, or rough terrain causing the aircraft to nose over. The Cub's control configuration kills pilots regularly. The throttle is overhead on the left side of the cockpit, an awkward position that requires pilots to reach up and back, making fine throttle control difficult, particularly during critical phases like short field approaches, where precise power management is essential. The lack of electrical system means no flaps, no lights, and no starter, requiring hand propping to start the engine, a dangerous procedure that's injured numerous pilots when engines fire unexpectedly with throttle improperly set. Hand propping accidents range from minor injuries when propellers strike hands or arms, to fatalities when unmanned Cubs lurch forward after starting, running over the pilot or bystanders. Ground handling is treacherous in Cubs due to the tailwheel configuration and narrow gear stance. Crosswind landings require precise technique, and loss of directional control during landing or takeoff roll leads to ground loops, violent, uncontrolled spins where the tail swaps ends with the nose, frequently collapsing the landing gear and damaging the propeller, engine, and wing. Ground loops rarely kill, but they destroy aircraft and occasionally injure occupants. More dangerously, Cubs are prone to flipping over backward during braking on soft or uphill terrain, when the tail is light and the nose wheel digs in, crushing the cockpit and injuring pilots. The fabric covering deteriorates over time, requiring inspection and replacement every 10 to 20 years, depending on storage and climate. Cubs with deteriorated fabric can experience fabric failure in flight, covering tearing away from wings or fuselage, drastically increasing drag and sometimes jamming control surfaces. Several accidents have involved fabric failure causing loss of control, with pilots unable to maintain flight when wing fabric tore away or control surfaces became jammed by loose fabric wrapping around hinges. Perhaps most insidiously, the Cub's docile reputation causes complacency. Pilots treat Cubs casually, flying without thorough pre-flight inspections, attempting operations in weather or terrain that exceeds the aircraft's capabilities, or allowing unqualified people to fly Cubs based on the assumption that if it's simple enough for World War II liaison pilots, anyone can handle it. That complacency fills accident reports, experienced pilots making careless decisions in Cubs that they'd never make in other aircraft, simply because the Cub didn't seem threatening. Combat pilots respect the Cub's history but recognize its limitations, make it genuinely dangerous in many scenarios, particularly for pilots transitioning from modern aircraft who don't fully appreciate how marginal the performance envelope truly is. The Cub is beloved and historically significant, but it's also killed more pilots than most people realize, earning its place among aircraft that demand respect and caution. And Glacier III, the home-built rocket that demands perfection. The Glacier III occupies a unique position in aviation, a kit aircraft that offers performance rivaling factory-built planes costing 3 times as much, combined with construction quality that depends entirely on the builder's skill and attention to detail. Designed by Tom Hamilton and produced by Stoddard Hamilton Aircraft and later Glacier Aviation from 1987 onward, the Glacier III is a composite aircraft built primarily from fiberglass and carbon fiber, using moldless construction techniques that allow home builders to create smooth, aerodynamic surfaces. The Glacier III features a low-wing configuration, retractable landing gear, side-by-side seating for 2, and typically a Lycoming IO540 engine producing 300 horsepower, though some builders install turbocharged variants producing 350 horsepower or more. With wingspan of 23.3 feet, length of 22.7 feet, and gross weight of 2,750 pounds, the Glacier III achieves cruise speeds of 250 to 280 knots, faster than most single-engine piston aircraft at any price point. Stall speed is approximately 70 knots clean and 60 knots with flaps. Climb rate exceeds 2,500 feet per minute, and the aircraft can reach altitudes above 20,000 feet. That performance comes with handling characteristics that kill pilots who aren't prepared. The Glacier 3's high wing loading, small wing area, optimized for speed rather than docility, and powerful engine create an aircraft that demands constant attention and precise control inputs. Stalls are aggressive with little warning. The wing breaks suddenly rather than progressively, and recovery requires immediate recognition and correct technique. In slow flight or during pattern work, the Glacier 3 provides minimal buffet or other warning before stalling, and pilots accustomed to trainers that shake and shudder before stalling find themselves in developed stalls before recognizing the aircraft was about to break. The roll rate is extremely high, making the aircraft responsive and fun to fly, but also meaning that inadvertent bank inputs during stall can roll the aircraft inverted before pilots react. Stall spin accidents are common in Glacier 3s, particularly during traffic pattern work, where pilots fly slower than normal and bank steeply from base to final, entering accelerated stalls that transition instantly into spins with insufficient altitude for recovery. Landing the Glacier 3 challenges even experienced pilots. Approach speeds are high, typically 80 to 90 knots, and the aircraft has minimal drag, meaning it wants to float forever once in ground effect. Pilots consistently fly approaches too fast, touch down halfway down normal runways, and either go around or attempt to brake aggressively, sometimes damaging tires or brakes, other times departing the runway into grass or obstacles. The retractable gear adds complexity, with gear-up landings distressingly common, some due to pilot distraction but others due to mechanical or electrical failures in home-built systems that lack the redundancy and testing of certified aircraft. Glacier 3 builders often install non-certified avionics, electrical systems, and landing gear actuators sourced from automotive or industrial suppliers rather than aviation-specific vendors, creating reliability concerns that manifest during critical phases of flight. The most dangerous aspect of the Glacier 3 is build quality variation. Unlike certified aircraft, where every component meets documented standards and assembly follows precise procedures verified by inspectors, kit aircraft are built by individuals with widely varying skill levels, workshop facilities, and attention to detail. A meticulous builder who follows plans exactly, uses proper materials, and thoroughly inspects every joint and layup can create a Glacier 3 that's structurally sound and performs beautifully. A careless builder who cuts corners, substitutes materials, or rushes construction can create a death trap that looks identical from outside, but harbors structural weaknesses that manifest catastrophically in flight. Glacier 3s have experienced in-flight structural failures, wings or tail surfaces separating due to improper construction, inadequate bond strength in composite joints, or use of incorrect materials. When a wing separates at 250 knots, no amount of pilot skill allows survival. Engine installations in Glacier 3s are particularly problematic. Builders must design and fabricate engine mounts, cooling systems, fuel systems, and exhaust systems without the engineering resources and testing that certified manufacturers perform. Cooling is often inadequate, with builders underestimating airflow requirements for 300 horsepower engines running at high power settings, leading to chronic overheating, premature engine failures, and occasionally catastrophic failures when pistons seize or connecting rods break. Fuel system design requires understanding of vapor management, fuel pressure regulation across varying altitudes and attitudes, and proper routing to prevent vapor lock or fuel starvation. Poor fuel system design has caused numerous engine failures in Glacier 3s, some at altitude where pilots could restart and land safely, others at low altitude after takeoff, where forced landings ended in fatalities. The Glacier 3's speed is its greatest attraction and its greatest danger. At 250 knots, pilots cover ground rapidly, but they also have much less time to recognize and react to problems. Whether that would be mildly uncomfortable in a Cessna 172 becomes hazardous in a Glacier 3, with turbulence generating G-loads that can exceed structural limits or cause loss of control. Pilots who lose situational awareness and allow airspeed to build in descents can exceed VNE, the velocity never exceed, risking flutter, structural failure, or loss of control authority. Several accidents have involved Glacier 3s breaking apart in flight after entering inadvertent spins, spirals, or dives from which pilots couldn't recover before airspeed exceeded structural limits. Insurance for Glacier 3s is expensive and difficult to obtain, with many insurers refusing coverage entirely or requiring pilots to have hundreds of hours in type, completion of factory training courses, and regular recurrent training. The factory training course emphasizes the aircraft's demanding nature, teaching pilots to treat the Glacier 3 as a high-performance machine that allows no mistakes. Former military pilots who transition to Glacier 3s after flying fighters find the performance familiar, but the build quality concerns unsettling, never quite trusting home-built systems the way they trusted military aircraft maintained by teams of trained technicians. The Glacier 3 is spectacular when properly built and flown by competent pilots, but the combination of aggressive handling, home-built quality variation, and extreme performance creates danger that even experienced pilots approach with caution. It's the fastest aircraft on this list, and arguably the most dangerous for pilots who underestimate what it demands. If you've made it this far, you understand that aviation demands respect, knowledge, and humility. These 5 aircraft aren't inherently evil. They're machines designed for specific purposes that, due to various factors, became more dangerous than alternatives. Some have design flaws that can't be fully mitigated. Others demand skill levels beyond what typical general aviation pilots possess. And some simply represent compromises that prioritize performance over forgiveness. The common thread is that all 5 have killed pilots who underestimated them. So before you rent, buy, or accept a flight in any aircraft, research its reputation, understand its quirks, and honestly assess whether your skills match what it demands. Drop a comment with which aircraft you think is most dangerous, hit like if you found this valuable, and subscribe for more deep dives into aviation's hidden dangers. Fly safe, stay humble, and remember that no airplane is worth dying for.